Stage 4, 8.77 miles, Briery Knob Road. Oh yeah, he's rear wheel drive. It's a nice long 911 though.
911 something, yes?
S. That's a pretty good start. Hey guys.
Simon, there's your rock. You want it? No?
Oh, it does it?
Yeah, it's got a stripe.
Nice.
Hold it up for the camera in the car. Hold it up here for the camera.
So that rock showed up in our front bumper. That's pretty awesome.
Our timer battery died.
Aw, thanks guys.
Yeah.
15, he said. 10. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. What was that? Left 5 plus 50. Right 5 plus 50. Left 5 long. Right 4 plus. Right 5 off camber into crest 100. Right 6 over small crest long 50. Left 6. Left 5 plus over crest long. Here's your left 6, then left 5 plus over crest long. Into right 4 minus. Into small crest 50. Left 5 minus, opens over small crest 70. Brake, left 3 plus, long, loose. Repeat 70, brake, left 3 plus, long, loose. 50. Right 5 minus over small crest, opens long, 70. Right 5 over small crest, tightens over small crest. Opens long. Left 6 into small crest. Into right 5 tightens over crest 50. Small crest 50. Left 5 plus. Left 5 over crest. Tightens 4 minus, very loose, down 50, turn left 2 minus. Turn left 2 minus. Right 5, oh, there's your left 2 minus. Right 5 plus, tightens 4 plus, over crest 50. Into left 4 minus. Right 5 opens over crest, tightens. Left 6 tightens. Here's your tightens. Left 6 tightens, 70. Right 4 plus long, stay in. Loose, opens, long over crest. Repeat, right 4 plus long, stay in. Loose, opens, long over crest. 70. Small crest into left 4 plus, stay in, loose. Repeat, left 4 plus, stay in, loose. Right 5 plus, into left, right 5 plus again. Left 6. Right 5 over small crest, tightens over small crest long, opens, tightens 5 minus, repeat, tightens over small crest long. Opens, tightens 5 minus. Left 4 plus over small crest, 50. Left 3 plus. Right 5 plus long over small crest. Tightens 4 plus long over double crest over rocks, 50. Left 5 plus short over small crest into right 4 plus, 70. Right 4 opens over small crest, tightens 4 minus. Left 6 over small crest, tightens 5 minus. Right 5 minus opens, tightens over small crest. Into left 4 long, opens, 50. Right 4 loose, long over crest, opens.
Right 4 long?
Yep, loose, over crest, opens. Left 5 plus long. Into caution, left 3 minus loose. Left 5 minus. Into right 5 plus. 50. Caution, stay right over crest, left 4 plus, down. Into turn left 3, go. 70. 6 plus, left 6 plus, kinks 200. Right 6, very long off camber, tightens 5 minus over crest, into left 4 minus, repeat. 6, long off camber, tightens 5 minus over crest, into left 4 minus. Left 5 minus. Right 5 plus, 70. Crest into left 6, 50. Right 6 plus, left 5 plus, into right 4 plus, loose. You see your left 5 plus, into right 4 plus, loose. Left 4 plus, long. Right 3 plus, long. Left 4 loose. Into right 5 plus over small crest opens into small crest 120. Small crest into right 5. Into turn right 5 plus loose long. Jump into right 5 plus 100. Left 6 plus, tightens 5, down, repeat, left 6 plus, tightens 5, down. Into right 5, long, tightens 4 plus, repeat 5, long, tightens 4 plus, 50. Left 6 plus, 100. Left 5 into right 5 plus 200. Left 5 tightens 4 plus into right 5 minus no cut. Repeat, right 5 minus no cut. Left 6 200. Left 5 very long loose. Into crest, into right 5 minus. Repeat, right 5 minus. 50. Brake, dip into bridge. Right 5 plus, tightens 4 plus, 100. Left 5 plus, very long. Right 5 minus, 50. Caution, Right 5 minus, over bridge, tightens 3. Not this one, keep going. Right 5 minus, 50. Caution, right 5 minus, over bridge, tightens 3. Left 5 long, opens 50. Right 6, 100. Left 5 minus, opens 120.
5 minus?
Yep. Opens 120. Left 6 plus 17. Right 5 minus, extra long, over small crest 150. Left 5 minus, extra long 100. Right 6, 100. Left 4 plus, very long, 150.
Plus?
Yes, very long, 150. Right 5 minus, opens, tightens, 4 plus, very long. Left 5, tightens, opens, extra long, go, 50. Tightens, opens, extra long, go, 50. Left 6 plus, right 6 plus, 50. Right 6 plus, 50. Left 6 finish, 350. Just floor it. You get it. Go, go, go. Left 6 finish, 350. Go, go, go.